Good morning to you. How you doing? Sunday morning. It is the 14th of April 2019. Started off very well here in South Manchester. The sun exploded into life this morning very early. It's gone a bit dull now though. It's kind of chilly as well. Welcome to Sunday View. Tweet the programme between now and 11 o'clock, around about 11 o'clock. That's UK time, of course. And let me know what you're thinking about the big stories. Lots of big stories to talk about as we browse the front pages of the UK's Sunday broadsheets and tabloids, because it is Sunday View.
Asking the questions mainstream journalists will never ask. This is your Richie Allen Show on richieallen.co.uk, Fab Radio 2 in Manchester, and triggerwarning.tv.
Sunday View, it is the newspapers, and we have listened into the mid-morning talk programmes as well, and we'll have some choice cuts from those programmes, Ridge and Mar. It is your Sunday View.
It's the Richie Allen Show, broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Yeah, it's been a kind of a chilly week all round, hasn't it? We've had some wonderful weather here in Manchester over the last week. Beautiful blue skies. But it's been a very chilly. Where's spring? Where's spring? Right, let's get rid of the old themes then. Could go over today. I'm not sure. We'll see how it pans out, because there are a few things to be getting on with. Do you know, before we look at the Sunday papers, before I look at the front pages, can I offer a bit of advice that I've offered before? And I say before because I've said this a few times. It's very important. I've been contacted in the last couple of weeks by a couple of friends of mine whom they're professional people, and they've encountered one or two problems because of things that they've posted on Facebook or on Twitter. When I say posted, I'm talking about expressing opinions about a variety of subjects. In one case, it was expressing opinions about Israel. In another case, it was expressing opinions about vaccines and so on. And it has gotten them into some trouble with their employer. Yeah, this is no joke, this. And I've talked at length about this in the past. If things are difficult for people, nobody can afford to lose their job. Nobody. Most of us are only a month or 2 months away from the footpath, from the sidewalk, as our American friends would say. If we were to lose our income stream, we'd be destitute in 2 months. I can say absolutely categorically, I could swear to it, that would be my situation. Gone. 2 months. Without any income stream whatsoever, we'd be in serious trouble. So, what's the most important thing? Free speech, courage, the courage to say what it is you want to say, the courage to express your opinions on the things that you feel strongly about. Yes, absolutely. But box clever with it. And I've said before and I'll say it again. Some of you need to be a bit more careful, and more than one of you needs to purge your Twitter and Facebook history. I'm saying no more on that. That's not a motion to cowardice at all. It's a warning that there are people out there, even if you are tweeting me using a handle like Mickey Mouse 2019, there are people who are very easily able to figure out who you are and then go and dox you. Think about it, that's all I'm saying. I've said it before, I'm going to leave it there. Right, let's begin with the Sunday Telegraph, Sunday View, live on Fab Radio 2 in Manchester, triggerwarning.tv, TuneIn Radio, and my own website, archived on Spotify, iTunes, and Podomatic.com. The Sunday Telegraph this morning: Corbyn bound for number 10 as Tories face 60-seat loss. Jeremy Corbyn is on course to sweep into number 10 after Theresa May failed to deliver on the promise of getting the UK out of the European Union by March 29th. Now, this is a major new poll, and it wouldn't sit too well with the Telegraph, because the Telegraph, of course, is traditionally a Conservative Party supporting newspaper. So they're not thrilled about the idea that Jezza is going to sweep into number 10. Effectively, the poll says if there was an election next week, Corbyn would win a majority. He wouldn't need the support of people like the Lib Dems or others. He'd be able to form a majority government. The Conservatives would lose 59 seats in the event of a general election, making Labour the largest party in the Commons. This is an exclusive poll commissioned by the Sunday Telegraph. So they've spoken to Ian Duncan Smith, the former leader of the Tories, and Amber Rudd, who's the Work and Pension Secretary, and they've suggested those two very senior politicians would be in danger of losing their own seats. Very marginal seats there, Amber Rudd's and Ian Duncan Smith. So this is the big story on the front page of the Telegraph today. The dramatic fall in support is being put down to anger at the failure to deliver Brexit. That's according to Professor Sir John Curtis, who's the president of the British Polling Council. And he said Leave supporters had been drawn back to either UKIP or they're joining Nigel Farage's newly launched Brexit party. There was a big launch on Friday in Coventry. You might have seen this, Nigel Farage, and he introduced almost, it was very WWE. It was almost like wrestling. It was funny. Out of the wings came the surprise Annunziata Rees-Mogg, the sister of Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's stood for the Tories a couple of times and lost. But she's one of the heavyweights wheeled out by Nigel Farage. Anyway, let's hear from Ian Duncan Smith, whose own seat might very well be in danger. He was on Sky News with Sunday... Say it again, Richie. He was on Sky News this morning with Sophie Ridge, and he was asked why are the polls so bad for the Conservative Party? Ian Duncan Smith.
On the 29th, when we didn't leave, that's when this has all gone wrong. Up until then, people were prepared to give Theresa May the benefit of the doubt, but they knew that she had said she would leave on the 29th of March. And the big problem was, as soon as we didn't leave, you can see all the poll ratings start to crash, and it's wholly linked to the fact that Leave or Remain, they were expecting us to go. When we didn't go, it looked like a complete breach with the pledge that we had made, and that's a disaster for a political party, and there's no question that polling at the moment, I think it's very voluble and very flexible, but it's where it is now, and I suspect it's about right.
Yeah, it's about right. I've said it myself. If there was an election tomorrow, Labour would form the next government one way or the other. I've suggested more than likely they'd need the support of the Liberal Democrats and maybe this new Change UK party, these Tiggers with Anna Soubry. Not that they could really get into bed with Corbyn, but you never know. So that's what it says anyway. Right, so what does Duncan Smith think about Jeremy Corbyn personally? You'll hear what he thinks of Corbyn personally, and then Duncan Smith talks about the prospect of European Union elections next month, which is pretty horrifying. Ian Duncan Smith.
I just cannot conceive the British public with Jeremy Corbyn's background and a party that is marred in charges of anti-Semitism and really ghastly misogyny and various other problems that they've got going on. A man who backs the Venezuela dictator who's been murdering his own people.
She could step in at any time now, Sophie Ridge, and say, well, this is an assassination of Jeremy Corbyn's character. Hang on a second. And Mr. Duncan Smith, aren't you the guy who was screaming with your eyes bulging out of your head and the veins popping out of your temples, screaming with delight as the then Chancellor George Osborne was announcing cuts to welfare that would destroy people? Was that you doing that? I couldn't imagine Jeremy Corbyn doing that, no matter how much you might differ in terms of your political points of view. Corbyn's a Marxist, he's a misogynist, he's an anti-Semite, he supports the Venezuelan dictator. Yeah, but you were jumping up and down screaming as Osborne was announcing that people were going to die as a result of his cuts. Does she jump in here, Sophie Ridge? Tell me she does.
All of these things will come home to roost, but the problem is...
Jeremy Corbyn
here she is.
Dispute with some
well,
of the
he may
pictures
dispute it or not,
there.
but he...
That's very weak, isn't it? Jeremy Corbyn might dispute some of that. She needs to do a bit better there.
He stands charged with supporting Maduro when the rest of the world says Maduro must go in Venezuela. But, you know, it's a kind of Marxism. And
the rest of the world thinks Maduro must go. I think the vast majority of people, ordinary people, even if they've never heard of Jim Marrs, even if they've never heard of independent radio, if they've never heard of John Rappaport and all the wonderful people we have on here, if they've never heard of the independent media, they still know that At this stage, they've learned to know that when the entire world says this man is a brutal dictator, it usually means it's bullshit. You know, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice. Well, the point is a fool never... Yeah, that was George Bush. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on you. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. That's right, Richie. Ironically. So people are sick to death of being told around the world there's dictators. They just don't believe it anymore. Character assassination of Jeremy Corbyn, whom I don't support, as you well know, but it's a bit lousy, isn't it?
And my point about this is whether people like it or they don't like it, none of that will be on display because it's all about Brexit at the moment. It's all about whether the Conservatives have delivered on their ability to leave the European Union. And we really have to get out, and we simply cannot fight the Euro elections. I gather dozens of Conservative Association members have now written a letter to the Prime Minister saying they are not prepared to fight Euro elections. It would be an utter disaster for us and a disaster for the country. I mean, what are you going to say on the doorstep? Vote for me and I'll be gone in 3 months.
Yeah, but you won't be gone in 3 months.
In 3 months. It doesn't make any sense.
Will you campaign in the European elections?
Well, you know, I always campaign for Conservative candidates, but I absolutely do not want to campaign on the Euro election.
She didn't ask you whether you wanted to or not. She asked you, will you campaign on behalf of would-be Tory MEPs? And she's very slow here, Ridge. She should have stopped him and said, it's not what you want. I asked you whether you would do it or not.
Ticket, which would be almost impossible to justify.
Almost impossible.
And I think the public will ask, why are we going to spend 109 billion plus and add another billion a month to that by being full members of the EU when we could have left and we should leave. So I think the date isn't October at all. The date is the key moment in May when we have to put up electoral officers. If we don't put those up, then we're leaving before the end of June. Yeah, we're not going anywhere. Now, also, in the very same article about Corbyn's chances of forming the next government, there's an interesting aside. Conservative Party lawyers are looking to open the door to get rid of Theresa May within a few months. Right, they've got to wait a year to challenge her again because the challenge in January failed, right? They're desperate to get rid of her. So lawyers looking at, can we do this? Can we rewrite the rules to get rid of May? Two past chairmen of the Backbench Committee, the 1922 committee, have written an article for The Telegraph today saying that the panel could alter the rules that prevent backbenchers from triggering another vote of no confidence in May until December. So they're saying there are loopholes whereby we might be able to change the rules to challenge her again. Lots of that sort of jiggery pokery, skullduggery going on. That poll commissioned by the Telegraph was supported by another poll, a poll of polls. That's 8,500 people surveyed between the 2nd and the 11th of this month, right? And that poll also shows Labour would become the largest party in the Commons. It would win 296 seats against 259 for the Tories. Here's the Telegraph's Camilla Tominey. She was speaking earlier on BBC's The Mar show, and it's about these attempts to get rid of May.
Suggestions here that you've got association chairman again willing Theresa May to stand down, and this growing tide now, Theresa May's downfall, is depicted here in a graph, and it's only going in one direction because it's not just grassroots and activists that now seem concerned. There's been polling to suggest that more people, having seen her as being resilient and a trooper, more of the public now would rather she stood down than remain in place. And I think when it comes to her personal approval rating, that's serious for number 10, because before she had got quite a lot of support simply by keeping calm and carrying on. I think the tide's turning.
She was Mrs. Dogged, and she's got another 6 months, of course. But there's talks of all sorts of plots going on in the Conservative Party. And among those staying at home during the European elections, it was reported this week, is a certain Mr. Boris Johnson, who doesn't want to contest them because he thinks they're ridiculous. Well,
I think most of the Brexiteers think that they're ridiculous. Why are we here fielding candidates in European parliamentary elections after we were supposed to have left? But I think the ludicrous nature of that isn't lost on voters either, who are scratching their head thinking, what on earth are we doing here?
Yeah, they should be doing a bit more than scratching their heads, really. I mean, the spectre of European elections in May, 3 years after the country voted to leave, should have people either taken to the streets in enormous numbers and staying there, causing massive problems logistically for the state, right? I'm talking about civil disobedience, no violence, truckers should block the motorways. We should go full scale France and then some, rather than scratch your head. It's madness, isn't it? Let's have European Union elections. Didn't we vote to leave? Yeah. Not going to do a lot on Brexit today, by the way. Just not going to do it. Sunday Telegraph also has an exclusive, or they're calling it an exclusive, but there's a similar story in the Mail on Sunday. Somebody's telling porcupines. Remember Shamima Begum, the ISIS bride, the UK citizen who had her citizenship revoked? You remember her? Well, according to the Telegraph today, she went to Bethnal Green School, didn't she? A school in Bethnal Green. The Telegraph is saying that she wasn't just this kind of demure ISIS bride. She played an active part in the ISIS organisation, apparently. Apparently she was in Islamic State's morality police, and she worked on recruiting other young women to join the jihadist group. The Telegraph says she carried a Kalashnikov rifle and earned a reputation as a strict enforcer of ISIS laws. Dress codes for women. She was an enforcer. The Mail on Sunday is saying that she even sewed suicide vests. Can you imagine it? It's just a lunatic asylum, isn't it? But anyway, that's in the Sunday Telegraph as well today. The Observer front page, bold emblazoned across it, Corbyn told back a public vote or lose Remainers. Straightforward, self-explanatory. It's coming from Labour's leader in the European Parliament this warning. He's a guy called Richard Corbett. He's an MEP. Labour has 20 members of the European Parliament in total, and this guy leads them in Brussels, and he's saying that if Corbyn doesn't very quickly back a public vote, a second referendum, Labour will lose voters to Remain parties. So if you don't quickly say that we should have a second referendum, Remainer parties will pick up some Labour votes, according to this guy, Richard Corbett. Right. Now, the Sunday Times front page, anti-Semitism. The Sunday Times just won't leave anti-Semitism and Labour alone. Jeremy Corbyn. The headline on the Times is, on the front page, is Corbyn admits we ignored anti-Semitism. Jeremy Corbyn has privately admitted that evidence of anti-Semitism in Labour has been mislaid, ignored or not used, the Sunday Times can reveal. He made the admission during a secretly recorded meeting with the MP Margaret Hodge to discuss the party's anti-Semitism crisis. Keep that in mind. Secretly recorded. Who secretly recorded it? Is it legal? Is it the right thing to do? And keep that in mind. The Sunday Times continues, it is the first time that Corbyn has cast doubt on his own staff's ability to tackle the problem that has dogged his leadership for years, and whether they have mishandled evidence of racism. Shouldn't use racism when talking about Jews. I'm sick to death of saying that, and you're sick to death of me saying it. You're tired of it. You're tired of hearing the same old thing from the same old guy, but I'm going to keep repeating it. Jews are not a race. Stop calling it racism. It isn't. Anyway, the paper goes on. He made the admission in February while outlining his intention to recruit the Labour peer Lord Falconer to review the party's complaints process. And he was recorded surreptitiously by Margaret Hodge, and it's all over the papers this morning and the BBC that Corbyn has admitted that they've failed to tackle anti-Semitism. The truth is possibly a little bit different. Have a listen to this. Mick Booker. Now, you won't have heard of Mick Booker. Mick Booker is the deputy editor of The Express. He was on Sky News this morning. He's always worth listening to, is Mick Booker. He's sitting alongside the broadcaster Anne Diamond, and they are very, very fair in their analysis of this story. And I really enjoyed listening to this morning. Michael Booker from The Express, the broadcaster Anne Diamond, talking about the story in the Times that alleges that Corbyn has said we failed, and also commenting on the fact that Corbyn was recorded secretly. Michael Booker And you'll hear a little bit later in the clip, Anne Diamond. This is very good.
Well, it's interesting because when I saw this headline drop last night, I thought, oh, that's bad for him. This doesn't look good at all, following on from the allegations in the Sun-Times last week. Because the headline looks as though, well, if you read it in a certain way, we ignored it and we don't care. But when you actually look at it, and it's this recording of a meeting with Margaret Hodge about the anti-Semitism crisis, and as your correspondent said before, it does sound as though he is trying to tackle anti-Semitism if you read the quotes as they are presented here. And he's talking about Lord Falconer's review of the complaints process. He says this happened because he was concerned that evidence was being mislaid, ignored or not being used, and there had to be a better system. So if you actually read it and go past the headline and the way it's presented, it does, you know, they've got a horrible problem with anti-Semitism, clearly, in the Labour Party. But in this, it does sound as though he wants to get something done. But at the same time, then that reflects badly on him, I suppose, because why hasn't he sorted out? Why is he in charge of this party?
And why doesn't he speak out about
it? And it seems as though he isn't in control of it. I think it sounds he's more inept.
But as you say,
it's
not actually overly negative in some respects.
No.
It makes you wonder why Margaret Hodge has released it.
Yeah. Well, it makes me wonder why she recorded it as well. It's not actually... recording somebody...
surreptitiously.
Surreptitiously, it's not on, is it?
Good stuff, Anne Diamond. It isn't on. It's a rather sneaky thing to do. But then Margaret Hodge is a vile, odious little woman, isn't she? To secretly record him. It's a bit underhand. He's a colleague of yours. He's in the same political party. He's leading the party. Yet you're recording him without his knowledge. It's not good, is it?
Not on, is it?
Well, it's illegal.
Is it illegal? I think it is.
It's illegal unless you've got
public interest, I suppose, as well.
And public interest certainly would come into this, but it's an extraordinary thing to...
I mean, like I say, if you look at it in a certain way, it does sound as though he's inept and he's not in control of the Labour Party. And again, that's an allegation a lot of people... But if you're part of those people who say that he is anti-Semitic himself, then this doesn't necessarily add to that argument. But it does sound as though he isn't on top of it. So,
but you're right, it could be a positive for him.
In terms of... And then further down it says, I get a lot of abusive stuff, murder and stuff. So there is also a headline in this that Jeremy Corbyn has been threatened with murder on a lot of occasions. Yeah. So, we talk about a lot of female MPs getting a lot of trolls and threatening with them. He's playing it down a little bit there, the threats that he gets. So I'm not being overly sympathetic, but I think sometimes you've got to give him the benefit of the doubt sometimes.
Bit of balance there on Sky News this morning for a change. That's a bit more like it, isn't it? It's the easiest thing in the world to do as journalists, and they achieved it. Little bit of balance. Good man, Mick Booker and Anne Diamond. Margaret Hodge, well, no more we'll say about her. The Sunday Express front page, ministers fear Brexit is dead. Well, they'd be right to fear it, because it is dead. This is talks between Corbyn's senior colleagues and Conservative ministers continue as they try to find agreement over a Brexit deal that might get the backing of most MPs. But the Sunday Express is saying some senior government figures believe there is zero chance of them succeeding, and Brexit is dead. Brexit is dead. Brexit. I'm going to start making my own jingles. I shouldn't say that because I'll be bombarded by jingles now by those of you who are pretty useful with a keyboard and with a computer. But we'll have to get jingles made up, won't we? Because we do Brexit is dead segments often enough that it warrants a jingle. Brexit is dead. Brexit is dead. Brexit is dead. Let's have a look at the tabloid newspapers then. The Mail on Sunday. Jihadi bride sewed suicide vests. This is Shamima Begum. We heard about Shamima earlier on the Sunday Telegraph. She sewed suicide vests. I know there isn't anything funny about suicide vests. I don't find it's just this lunatic asylum world we live in. You've got girls doing stuff like, I don't know. What do girls do at 16, 17? I don't know. I caught myself there. I was going to say, you've got 16-year-old girls doing what? What do they do? I think they spend most of their time on their phones, right? Probably. Anyway, they don't read magazines anymore, do they? Or do they still read magazines? And then you've got girls halfway around the world sewing suicide vests on. Marvellous. Sunday People, hell of Dubai horse jibe mum. You gotta love the headlines. Hell of Dubai horse jibe mum. This is the woman, Layla. or Lale, is it Layla? Sharavesh. She was banged up in Dubai briefly after she called her ex-husband's new wife a horse on Facebook. Basket case countries, Dubai, of course, and places like that. The Sunday Mirror, police probe race attacks on footy stars' kids. This is a story about the former Liverpool player Jibril Cisse. Apparently his children have been racially abused. That's on the front page of the Sunday Mirror. And that is the front pages of the newspapers, dear listener, as we get to 25 minutes past 11 on Sunday the 14th of April 2019. Now we're going to go in depth into one or two stories. There's a bit of Julian Assange news, so we'll talk about that in a minute. The leader of UKIP was on the Andrew Marr show this morning, Gerard Batten. We'll talk about that. And there's also an interesting story about mental health issues among members of Parliament. Loads to get into on Sunday View with me, Richie Allen. So just don't go anywhere. All right, this is Europe's most listened to independent radio show. You're damn right it is. My name is Richie Allen. Welcome to Sunday View. This is Def Leppard, back with more after this in 3 minutes. That is the sound of the Steel City, Sheffield, Def Leppard, Joe Elliott on the Richie Allen Show. Sunday View for the 14th of April 2019. Straight to the tweets. By the way, Paul Alawi tweeted me, or I think it was Paul, saying it was a sinister warning at the beginning of the programme about Twitter. Yes, Paul, it's not meant to alarm people. I was speaking to a good friend of mine over email the other day. It's not about her, but I was advising her. It's not about her, what I was saying, because she's not in any particular trouble. But I was advising her, and I'm advising you, I'm advising everybody to be very careful. When your livelihood is dependent on what you say, or could be dependent on what you say, or could be inhibited by something you say on a social media, whether it's Instagram, Twitter, whatever, Facebook, you've got to box clever. I'm not a coward, but it's easy for me to have courage. I burnt my bridges with society and with the establishment back in 2010, 2011. You know, yes, I was offered a commercial radio gig back in 2014, just before I launched this Richie Allen Show. I was offered a very good job at a very well-known commercial station here. I knew that was the last chance for me. I either took that job and left doing independent radio, or I launched my own show knowing that I would never again get a foot in the door of commercial radio. I chose the latter, not because I'm a big hero or because I'm a great guy, a big champion. No, I'm not. It's because I couldn't bear doing breakfast radio on a commercial station. But I also knew there was no going back. There's no returning for me now. So I say what I want to say, and I know I don't have to worry about going to work on Monday and somebody whom I work with taking offence at something I've said and beginning to make life difficult for me with human resources. Something I might have said on Twitter. That's not in my life, but it might be in your life. And you got to think very hard about it, all right? Lest somebody say, oh, it's easy for you, Richie. Yes, it is easy for me. I've made my bed. There's no going back. Right, Ricky says, anti-Semitic. Oh my God, everything and everyone is apparently anti-Semitic. Yawn, says Ricky. Yes, mate, yawn is right. Hi to Andy Newman. Brexit died nearly 3 years ago after we voted for it. Richie, says Andy. Thank you, Andy. Hi to Patrick Vidian. Human resources departments have been pioneers of identity politics, screwed values and collectivism for many a year now, says Patrick. Thanks, Patrick. Hi to Martin in Spain. Hi to Natasha Lynch. How you doing, Natasha? With the best Twitter name there's ever been, by the way. She tweets under the name Natasha Wonky Leg Small Tits. Love that. David Stanford tweets, Brexit can't be dead. It was never alive. Not even a pulse, he says. Steve James, thanks, David. Steve tweets, the Brexit script is boringly predictable now. I said 2 weeks back it was now a long delay and push for a second referendum. That's the way it's going. Should have listened to me 3 years ago, Steve. I would have saved you some time. Hi to Lord Twat Waffle, who says Richie Sheffield's finest, providing the tunes. Love it, says Lord Twatwaffle. Yes, I love that particular song, Def Leppard, Animal from Hysteria. I love it. Right, shall we move on? Shall we talk a bit about Julian Assange? Because his father has been calling for the Australian government to help his son. In fact, his father has said he should and could be brought back to his home country. His dad is a guy called John Shipton, living in Melbourne, has called on the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison to step in and help Julian Assange. He told News Corps paper The Herald Sun, did John Shipton, Assange's dad, that Morrison and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade should, in a nuanced way, do something. He said it can be resolved to the satisfaction of everybody. There has been some talk in a meeting between a senator and a senior official from the Department of Foreign Affairs to extradite Julian to Australia. His dad also expressed horror at the condition his son was in when he was taken out of the embassy on Thursday. I saw him, the way they dragged him down the steps, the coppers. He didn't look good. I'm 74 and I look better than my son. He's 47. It's such a shock. Now, his lawyer, Julian Assange's lawyer, Jennifer Robinson, was on Sky News this morning with Sophie Ridge. Ridge asked the lawyer, does Julian Assange think he's above the law?
He's not above the law, and the fact is Julian has never been concerned about facing British justice or indeed Swedish justice. This case is and has always been about his concern about being sent to face American injustice. We've been warning since 2010, and I've been working on his case since the initial Swedish request came through. We've been warning since then that he would face the risk of US extradition for actions and his work associated with WikiLeaks publications. We warned for years, and that is precisely what has happened. He was right all along, and we were right all along to be worried about it. He was granted asylum inside the Ecuadorian embassy because of his concern about this risk of onward extradition to the United States. He has always cooperated with the Swedish investigation. He remained in Sweden to answer questions. We offered his testimony before they sought his extradition, and we continued to offer his testimony. He only sought asylum inside the Ecuadorian embassy when Sweden refused to give assurances about onward extradition to the United States. That was what he was concerned about. He offered his testimony from inside the embassy. The Ecuadorian government sought assurances from Sweden he wouldn't be sent to the US. Those assurances were not forthcoming. And let's not forget that he actually answered questions of the prosecutors years ago, and that was when they decided to drop the investigation in Sweden. So there have been no charges in Sweden. He offered his testimony and they decided to drop the case.
Okay.
When they dropped the case, he didn't leave the embassy. So if he had been, all these people saying he was hiding from Swedish justice, if that were the case, why didn't he walk out of the embassy 2 years ago when this case was dropped?
These are, I think, good questions, and they are fair comments by Assange's lawyer, and it is something that the bulk of the media has chosen to ignore. So Sophie Ridge says this is all very complex. I think Jennifer Robinson explained pretty clearly to Sophie Ridge there why Assange sought asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy, because he didn't believe that the Swedes were playing ball with him fairly and squarely. He believed that he would be extradited to America. Sophie Ridge says it's all very complex, and you'll hear more from the lawyer.
Well, let's try and unpick some of what you're saying here, because it's quite a complex story. We're talking there about some of the Swedish allegations, really serious allegations, rape, sexual assault. He, of course, denies them. And you say that it's all about him worrying about being extradited to the US. But at the same time, it was the extradition to Sweden, which was why he went into the embassy in the first place, because the UK agreed with the extradition to Sweden. 2 weeks later, he went into the embassy. I mean, the US wasn't on the table at that point.
There was a grand jury investigation that was opened back in 2010, and we were concerned about the risk of US extradition then. That concern has been proven correct this week.
But shouldn't he have gone to Sweden to face those allegations?
We were concerned because Sweden had not provided the assurance against onward extradition.
This is the fourth time now that Jennifer Robinson has said to Sophie Ridge, here's the reason why Assange didn't go to Sweden when these allegations of sexual misconduct were made. She's actually said it 4 or 5 times at this stage.
Tradition that once in custody, he would not be able to seek asylum with respect to the United States. That is why he walked into the embassy when he did. The asylum that was granted by Ecuador was with respect to the risk of being sent to the United States to face prosecution for his publishing activities and for actions associated with that. That is precisely the request that came through this week. Now, Ecuador continued to negotiate with Sweden to try to deal with the Swedish investigation and to allow prosecutors to question him so he could answer the Swedish allegations while protecting him from US extradition. That is why he was in the embassy.
You see, you say that he's provided testimony, that he's answered the allegations in Sweden, but it's on his terms, isn't it? I mean, what does that mean, offer testimony? Does that just mean writing a letter to Sweden? For a lot of people, that's not appropriate.
The Swedish prosecutors came inside the Ecuadorian embassy to...
This is the fourth time she's told Ridge that the Swedish prosecutors interviewed Assange in the embassy. And upon reflecting on what Assange told them, against what they had been told by the alleged victims, they decided not to pursue.
Embassy to ask him questions about the case. He gave his testimony, and after that they chose to close the investigation. This is a fact that has been completely lost in the discussion about this case over the past couple of weeks.
Yes, and the reason it's been ignored is because the mainstream media, 90% of it is owned by 5 companies. I've named them a million times on the programme. Answers on a postcard, please. I'll give you... what prices could I give you? I've got a stuffed cuddly toy. What are the names of the corporations? You know the names of these corporations. Are owned. Every newspaper in this country, every television station and radio station, its ownership can be traced to 5 mega corporations around the world. So this is why they ignored this very salient fact about these allegations. Now, how can anybody be extradited for allegations anyway? Let's suppose that Julian Assange did take advantage of a girl when she was drunk or when she was asleep. Now, I don't know that he didn't. Right? I'm mindful of the fact that there might be, women listening to this thinking, oh, you bastard. No. I'm not saying he didn't do it. I'm saying he had very good reason not to go to Sweden. He had a very good reason not to go. He was certain, and I think he was right. I've been indifferent really about Julian Assange over the years and about WikiLeaks and what they released and what they didn't release and all the rest of it. I've been very balanced on it. I'm no big fan of Julian Assange, but I also know that the information given to Assange by then Bradley Manning, now Chelsea Manning, was in the public interest, and it had to be published, and he did, and it was the right thing to do, and it was very important. And I also know that there are people in the United States who want to kill him. Jesus, senators have asked for drone strikes against him in the past. Others have called for his, summarial execution, murder him. They want to punish him, to send out a message to anybody else who might have information. That this is what happens to you. Look what we did to Bradley Manning, Chelsea Manning. Look what we did to Assange. So this is true. It's important. Right? And how can anybody be extradited for allegations? If the Swedish authorities had proof or had enough evidence to secure a conviction against him, they would have formally charged him. You can't go around extraditing people over allegations. Allegations are hearsay. They don't amount to a hill of beans. Right? I thought the lawyer has done well on television in the last couple of days. I fear that Assange will end up being extradited to the United States, and I hope I'm wrong. Let's leave that one there. It's 18 minutes to 11 to the top of the hour. It is Sunday View with me, Richie Allen. Thanks for listening. There have been a few tweets on that. Joshua tweets, he's listening in South Australia. How you doing, Joshua? Thanks for listening. Australia should find a way to bring him home. Surely we care enough about his well-being to do something, asks Joshua. Well, absolutely, the Australian government has an iron in the fire here. He's an Australian citizen. They have to be looking out for his best interests, Cliff Moore tweets, Richie, good morning, hope you're well. Trying to listen to the programme but having to turn you down in favour of Eagle Pickle, Macca Packa in the night garden to try and settle down a tired 1.5-year-old. Catch the repeat, says Cliff. Well, give the 1.5-year-old a kiss for us, Cliff. Great times it must be. Great times there in the Moore household. Loads of tweets coming in. To see what other people are tweeting, go to twitter.com where it says search Twitter. Put Richie Allen Show, all one word, and you will see what people are tweeting me. So that was Julian Assange. Ilhan Omar is the Muslim congresswoman, the Democratic congresswoman, who's been in hot water of late for criticising Israeli influence, AIPAC and all of that, Ilhan Omar. But now she's in an argument, apparently, with Donald Trump. We'll do a bit of American politics just for a minute. She's having a row with Donald Trump about 9/11. So when I saw this headline on the BBC, my eyes widened. I thought, lovely. The headline is Ilhan Omar, the 9/11 row embroiling the US Congresswoman. I thought, wow, has Ilhan Omar questioned the legitimacy of the 9/11 Commission report? Has she suggested that it is a load of old bollocks? Has she? Nah, she hasn't. She hasn't. It's about Trump tweeted, "We will never forget," alongside a video showing footage of the September the 11th attacks. Okay? And Trump tweeted this footage interspliced with a speech by this Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. So Trump fired the first shot across her bows, right? Probably at the behest of his Zionist puppet masters. No doubt about it. So Trump has had a go at this woman because at one time or another she said some people did something, kind of downplaying the attacks. And she was talking basically about how Muslims were demonized after September the 11th. How Muslims were kind of living in fear in certain parts of the United States. How Islamophobia was on the rise post 9/11. And when she was describing the attacks, she said some people did something. And apparently that's caused a lot of offence in America. They're making a news story out of this because Trump is going after her, or it appears that he is anyway. It's kind of interesting, right? It's identity politics. Right versus left, far right, far left, alt-right, progressive left, and all of that out bollocks. Identitarianism, right? And speaking of it, and speaking of Islamophobia and all of that, the UKIP leader Gerard Batten was on the Andrew Marr show this morning. Now, I found this very interesting for a couple of reasons. Reason one, I have worked at every level of commercial media. So I produced programs, right? I was the man responsible for putting programs on, deciding the content, and sourcing the guests. Sometimes paying them, sometimes not. That was my job. And I was very interested in the Gerard Batten interview this morning. Now, I don't have any sympathy for any political party, but it's obvious to me that Gerard Batten was invited on by the BBC producers to talk about the 6-month Brexit delay and the EU elections in May, no doubt. And of course, he would be asked about Nigel Farage briefly, I would have imagined. I bet you that's what the producers told him. But no, he was asked almost exclusively in the short time he was on about Farage's new party and about Tommy the Thug Robinson. First, Andrew Marr played Gerard Batten, comments made by Nigel Farage at the launch of the Brexit Party.
They have decided to go down a route where there seems to be a complete obsession, not just with Islam, but it would appear with all of its adherents. They've attracted a fairly, shall I say, loutish fringe, and I don't think that Middle England, decent people, want to vote for a political party that is linked to extremism, violence, criminal records and thuggery.
No. Violence, thuggery, extremism, criminal records. UKIP has gone down a bad road. So what did UKIP's current leader, Gerard Batten, say to that? Here he is.
Nigel's known me for 27 years. He knows exactly where I stand on things, just as I know where he stands on things. He knows that that's a smear. This is a device that he's now using to try and discredit UKIP, his former party, and to enhance the chances of his own new party. Now, many thousands of people who were in UKIP and supported Nigel are still there. So he's talking about those people who supported him. We've had approximately 11,000 new members come in during my period of office. So we've gone up from about 17,000 to about 29, almost 30,000 now. And what I'm getting back from my local branches and activists are these ordinary, decent people who support what we stand for and want to help us in what we're doing. See, what he's saying, Andrew, is a complete smear.
What he says is that in policy terms, there's not much that divides you, but it's about people. And the reason he's saying that is because I'm going to give you an example of Carl Benjamin, who's one of your leading MEP candidates. And he's somebody, a very, very controversial figure online and all the rest of it. He emailed or texted a Labour MP saying he wouldn't even rape her.
I think this
is the kind of person that you're making an MP.
I think that this was a satire, and he was actually trying to draw out
not good
other
satire.
people. He is a
satire. A UKIP, a fairly prominent member of UKIP, said to somebody on Twitter, "I wouldn't even rape you." Batten said it was satirical. Couldn't make it up.
He is a free speech. He's a classical liberal, actual Carl Benjamin, if ever you have him on and interview him. He's precisely the kind of person that Nigel would have liked in the party when he was leader, because he can open up access to us on social media to all kinds of people that we now want to move out, we now want to reach out to.
Let's just pause on this. He tweets to a Labour MP, "I wouldn't even rape you." How is that satire?
It's a good question, isn't it? You know, you know that I'm no PC animal. Far from it. You know, I say free speech for everybody. But how can you call yourself a credible political candidate if you're tweeting to somebody in another party, "I wouldn't even rape you"? It's a good question.
Well, I don't know the exact context of that.
All right, you don't know the exact context now, but a minute ago it was fine. It was satirical.
I certainly don't condone any remarks like that. But he is not a bad person as he's trying to be portrayed.
He sounds like any other party would have kicked him out, and you've made him your lead MEP candidate.
Yeah. Hate to find myself agreeing with Andrew Marr, but a credible political party. Obviously, none of the political parties are credible. None of them. Obviously, right. But at least with the rest of them, they would distance themselves from people saying stuff like that, because whatever you might think of it, about making jokes and all the rest of it, and even if he was joking, and I'm sure he was joking, you can't sell that image to the general public, can you? You can't sell that. You know, vote for us, we're lovely. Well, hang on, one of the guys that you work with mentioned rape to a Labour MP on Twitter. Oh, there is that, all right, yeah. Anyway, I mean, who tweets things to a woman saying, "I wouldn't rape you anyway"? Who does that? And again, I'm no champion of political correctness. I wouldn't see the man ruined for that. But you couldn't stand with him, could you? You know, in terms of, you couldn't stand alongside him and say, "Let's vote for us," you know. Anyways, then the chat turned to Stephen Yaxley Lennon, inevitably.
All right, well, let's turn to Stephen Yaxley Lennon, who likes to call himself Tommy Robinson.
how long it would take, but
this is how long it's taken. Yeah. You've appointed...
I love Andrew Marr. He turned into a right bitch this morning. This is how long it's taken. Shut your mouth. I'll ask the questions I want to ask. Anyway, what about Tommy the Tit?
Him as an advisor. What are his qualifications? He's not allowed to join UKIP. What are his qualifications for the UKIP?
Good question, isn't it? What qualifications does Tommy Robinson have to do anything?
The UKIP leader's advisor.
I'm glad that you made that point, that he's not a member of UKIP. I have lots of people who advise me, some of who are not members of UKIP. I asked him to advise me on prison conditions and the grooming gang issue. He certainly knows about it.
Why?
Well, because it was something that the grooming gang issue is a particular one that we were interested in. Unfortunately, he hasn't been able to do a lot of work because he's had quite a lot of pressures on him personally lately. But what he wanted to do and what he's been prevented from doing over the last year is actually looking at not the offences themselves and who was responsible, but who covered it up. And I think this is a very important story that he was going to help us with.
He is seen by many people as a figure of the far right and a dangerous man. Nigel Farage says, "I believe Tommy Robinson is entirely unsuitable to be involved in any political party. His entourage includes violent criminals and ex-BNP members."
This is coming from a man, Nigel Farage, who employed an ex-member of the National Front for several years. Now, he takes the view that that gentleman is no longer associated with that, therefore it's okay for him to actually be a member and be employed by UKIP. Okay. And I take the view that Tommy Robinson is not far right. If you had him on and interviewed him yourself and asked him for his views, you would find out that he doesn't have far right views. And he's somebody that can give me some information and research that will be useful to me. And if he ever becomes a member of UKIP, that will be subject to a vote of all the UKIP membership.
And then Andrew Marr should have left it alone there and then spoke to Gerard Batten about policy, but he didn't. And anybody who wants to watch that interview, you can watch it on the BBC iPlayer. He then launches into attacking Gerard Batten for his own opinion on the religion of Islam. And the point I make is, regardless of whether you agree or disagree with Gerard Batten, it's pretty lousy of the BBC to invite a guy on. I'm sure they invited him on to talk about the 6-month delay, the European elections and all the rest of it, and they didn't. They wanted to get stuck into him about Tommy Robinson and about one or two other people. If you're going to do that, tell your interviewee beforehand, listen, these... Now you might say, well, how do you know they didn't, Richie? Believe me, right? I used to be those people. It was pretty lousy. Anyway, okay? Don't jump down my throat, by the way, if you happen to be a supporter of Mr. Stephen Yaxley Lennon. I am one of his biggest supporters. Hang on. In terms of supporting his right to say whatever he wants to say, his right to stand for any election that he wants to stand for, not to be shut down or silenced by anybody. I just reserve the right to disagree with him and to lampoon him sometimes. Do you want to laugh before you wrap things up? Do you want to laugh? Do you want to lighten it up? By the way, Hayden Hewitt, the impresario in the Northwest, the man behind liveleak.com, one of the most important websites in my life, will be going on the air shortly after this programme ends on triggerwarning.tv. He'll be doing a podcast, always worth listening to Hayden Hewitt, particularly if you like this programme, because Hayden quite often takes a contrarian approach. He often has a different opinion, a different slant on things than I do, and that's bloody well good. Listen to those with whom we disagree or differ. So Hayden, you might be listening, mate, confirm that for us. Triggerwarning.tv. It's at Triggered TV on Twitter. Do you want to giggle? Do you want a proper laugh? Before we go off the air today, Stephen Dixon, Sky News presenter, this morning live on breakfast television with this story. Listen up now.
The mental health charity Mind says MPs are turning to alcohol, hiding in cupboards and feeling out of control because of the stress caused by Brexit. It sent information and advice to all MPs and their staff on how to cope with what it says is the toxic political climate in Westminster. Well, let's talk to the Chief Executive of Mind, Paul Farmer. Good morning to you.
Morning, Paul. Good morning, Paul. Hang on a second now. So the mental health charity Mind has written to MPs because they're concerned about deteriorating mental health among MPs.
What kind of fuckery is this?
Yeah, they're stressed. It's a tough job. They're in the public eye. They're being confronted by the public. And all of that old jazz. God love them, right? God love them. Have a listen to this guy, Farmer. Gillian Joseph asks Paul Farmer about this, about Brexit and MPs' mental health.
We have seen with Brexit people being particularly vocal and sometimes actively aggressive. Yeah. We remember the scenes of Anna Soubry around the Houses of Parliament, actually approached by members of the public. She felt very vulnerable, one would imagine, in that situation. That's an added stress, isn't it? That's an added stress that perhaps other people don't face going to work every day.
It is an added stress, and you know, in this age of social media, people receive a huge amount of abuse online. They also are in the public eye, and therefore the very nature of their job means that they want to and have to have contact with the public, which might mean you find yourself in an environment, a situation that you wouldn't necessarily expect. And so, again, in line with other types of jobs where you find yourself in that position, then you know, it's important that you understand what you can do to protect yourself against those situations so that you can cope with what are quite difficult and quite traumatic situations sometimes.
I do wonder, though, what you would say to the people who I haven't looked, but they will be tweeting. They'll be tweeting right now saying, why is a charity like Mind, which does a tremendous amount of good work, focusing on people who are now viewed as the privileged few, rather than actually the huge problems that people are facing across the country.
Oh, what a question.
Facing across the country.
Good man, Stephen.
Well, of course, we are doing lots of other things as well. And I think perhaps in the workplace, it's just worth mentioning that we work with hundreds of organisations up and down the country, that really encourage better workplace mental health.
He waffled on. MPs should live underneath their beds. They should be hiding in fear of the wrath of the general public. not from violence. Nobody should ever harm a hair on anybody else's head. Never, ever do that. Don't be violent. Don't scream at people. They should be living in fear under their beds that the people will rise up and gently escort them out of the buildings they inhabit, wave them away, and take their country back. This guy's talking about their mental health. God love them. They have to listen to some disillusioned people who are fed up, and they have to take a bit of abuse on Twitter. Oh, we better get them sorted out. Let's look after their mental health. We live in a lunatic asylum. Mr. Shin tweets, Richie, Sargon of Akkad, whoever that is, made the rape remark. It's being taken out of context. This guy's a popular, intelligent YouTuber. Mate, respectfully, and you know I'm no PC guy, I don't see how it could be taken out of context. If you said to a woman in the current climate, I wouldn't rape you, you're either very stupid or you're maybe a nasty piece of work, maybe. You know, that's just my take on it. Hey, free speech for one, free speech for all, right? Thank you for listening, by the way. You enjoy the... Hi to Ruth in Australia. How you doing, Ruth? Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Speak tomorrow, Monday at 5. I've been Richie Allen. This is Neil Diamond. Bye now. All right? Have a great day. Look after yourselves and one another.